Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time for one of the videos that I've been teasing for a few weeks now, and that is, should the Memphis Showboats and Houston Roughnecks be relocated? This is a big talking point. I know this is a very divisive topic among fans as well. Whether it be that you're a fan of one of these two teams, whether it be that you don't believe moving teams is a good idea, or if you believe these teams should have been moved last year. It's a very divisive topic, and I'll give my thoughts in this video, obviously. So, let's get started by looking at the base reason for why this whole topic was brought up, and that was mainly attendance. Now, yes, we all know the UFL is a TV league. We know that a lot of these lower-end leagues, attendance is usually like the third or fourth most important thing for money, not even one of the most important. You know, like not like a top 2 or 3, usually sponsorship deals, TV ratings, and other things are more important. But the optics is what matters about attendance. Even more so than TV ratings, the attendance is what really can make people see a league being successful or not successful, or a franchise being successful or not successful. And as for this season, the two worst teams were the Showboats and Roughnecks. And we'll get to this in a later point in the video, but both of these numbers not only are by far the worst this season, they are down from last year, and in fact, they're not even good compared to the past other leagues. The Vegas Vipers averaged over 6K every single game. Roughnecks and Memphis both couldn't do that this year. Now, that's despite neither team even being the worst in the league. The San Antonio Brahmas were the worst team in the league overall with a 1-9 record, and they are, in a technical standpoint, because of their point differential, the worst team in this era of spring football. And look, people can use the argument, well, they just weren't in a championship game. Yeah, but all their games were in the second half of the season. So, outside of their first home game, we knew this team was terrible, and people weren't buying tickets to go see the team suck. They were going to see the team play. And guess what? Their worst game of the season was over twice as good as, let's say, the Showboats' best game. Or I think technically the Showboats' best game was a little bit better than the worst game. Point is, both Houston and Memphis were terrible. I mean, Houston for a couple of weeks had the record for the worst attended game, which they then broke their own record. Then Memphis had the rain delay game, but then as proven by DC's Week 10 game, the delay is only somewhat impactful, as DC's game that was weather impact also did significantly better than Memphis's regarding it. It was bad. Now, the other point to bring up is the TV ratings. Now, these TV ratings are a bit different. These TV ratings that I'm showing here are relative to their specific city. Now, this is a big indicator on just how well that market actually likes their team. And here we see Birmingham and St. Louis crush the competition, followed by Michigan coming in at third. Then everybody else is under a 1.0. Now, SDEM ended up doing some little mathing using ChatGPT, so of course take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because it's, AI and all that. But essentially the numbers that he has, you have your population of that metro area, followed by the TV rating, followed by the households, followed by the individuals watching. So what you end up getting is you get the actual numbers where you see Memphis is dead last at 10,700 because while they have a 0.8 rating, which is higher than the likes of Houston and even DC, because Memphis is such a smaller market compared to those other places, it's actually really bad. Houston, of course, was on the low end of their overall rating, but because it's Houston, they ended up getting roughly 47,000 people watching and almost 20K households. So that's, of course, a big deal. Now, let's jump right on into should Houston relocate. When you look at Houston, before I give my verdict, let's just look at some of the facts. Fact number 1, this is currently the 5th largest metro population in the entire country. Look, I know these are estimates from 2024, they're not the exact census, but it's important to know that even back in the census, the city was still 5th. It is a massive area. Look, people talk about the New York, LA area. Yes, those two areas are massive media markets. But once you get past them, your next really big 4, 5-ish are Chicago, the Dallas area, which is Arlington, Houston, Miami, and then, of course, Washington, D.C. So when you see this, you kind of realize that Houston is in this really massive market. So that's one thing that does help them out. Again, we just saw with the TV ratings. If this team can get up to, let's say, a 2.0 TV rating, you're going to be having really solid TV ratings for almost every Houston game just because of how many people in Houston are watching. Now, attendance, this is where we see an issue. People like to look at the 2023 XFL and believe the attendance was just all sunshine and rainbows. Yes, St. Louis was still incredible, DC was incredible, San Antonio was really solid. Houston, however, massive downgrade from the 2020 XFL. Usually I don't talk about 2019 AF and XFL, but for this type of video, it is important to bring up what this team's potential is in this era. When you look at the 2020 XFL and their 3 games, they had over 17K in all 3 games, including their final game having just shy of 20,000. Then in 2023, no PJ Walker, a worse overall team, but still a playoff team, and yes, they got upset in the first round, but for the most part, people believed they were going to be a shoo-in for the championship game. They only averaged around 12K. Now, they did pretty much average around that. This wasn't like, oh, they had a 20K game and a bunch of 8K games. No, they pretty much hovered around that 11 to 14K-ish the entire season, which is really good for consistency, but still down. Then 2024, the first season in the UFL. This was not the same Houston Roughnecks team. Some people really don't understand how big a deal this was to Roughnecks fans, because if you were a true Roughnecks fan and you went from Wade Phillips and that team to the Mark Thompson, player-led in terms of overall talent. Obviously, he didn't, play as well as we thought because of the injury and all that. But the Curtis Johnson head-coached Gamblers team that became the Roughnecks wasn't good. In fact, it's still kind of debatable on which Roughnecks this really is. The UFL is seemingly trying to act like this is the same Roughnecks lineage as the XFL version, whereas in reality, it's like the Gamblers. Again, I've equated it to the Ravens-Browns situation. For those of you who don't know, the Ravens were kind of viewed as an expansion team despite the fact they were the Browns. And then the Browns came back and they used the Browns lineage, which should have been the Ravens lineage, but they didn't. That's kind of what happened with Houston. Now, they also moved to Rice Stadium, which was considered a massive downgrade, one of, if not the single biggest downgrade from a venue in this era of spring football history. And everybody blamed that as the attendance issues. Now, I and a lot of other people expected that even if this team's attendance didn't spike, it would at least get higher because of TDECU. Well, they went back to TDECU in this season, and their attendance went down even more. And that's despite the team finishing 5-5, and again, having life at certain parts of the season. When you look at Houston, a big reason for this attendance decline isn't because of just how the team is. It's a lot of the optical kind of things, right? The optics of it. Changing the Gamblers to the Roughnecks. Changing your head coach, your entire roster. I think people don't realize how many players stick around year to year. The Michigan Panthers are a great example. Breland Speaks and Frank Gidna, especially Frank, has been with the team every single year. Speaks, ever since he joined, has been back every single year. You almost always get at least one quarterback returning, right? No, people aren't a huge fan of him now, but Danny Etling did come back from the team last year. The Battlehawks, you've seen Akeem Butler there for a multitude of years. You did see AJ McCarron there for a multitude of years. The Stallions, you still have some guys who have been here since the first championship team. So I don't think people realize just how many players the Roughnecks did lose that would have been back if this team had truly stayed. Instead, you change it to the Roughnecks. Now, if you were a Gamblers fan, you also got pissed off because instead of being the Gamblers who you were hoping would go to Houston, you're now with the Roughnecks. It was a very poor decision, and that was a huge reason why the attendance ended up falling so far in 2024. Now, the ticket issues, again, the ticket prices, obviously the USFL those 2 years have been the best, but the UFL for some reason has continued to kind of increase ticket prices at certain areas. I know the playoffs are doing a bit different things, but overall not great. Now, the attendance going down was definitely a worrying thing, but should the Houston Roughnecks move? My verdict is not yet. The fact is, this is too big a market to give up on this quickly. You have had success in the past. Again, even though that 12K number from 2023 was a downgrade from the 2020 number, if you had that this season, that would be viewed as a really good number. So you still have potential in the market. You still had a TV rating that, despite being in this massive market, was not the worst overall. Again, the rating they had of that 0.6, while yes, was bad, DC was also a 0.6. So it's not like you're doing horrible on that front, because again, DC, yes, it is close in terms of the overall population, but it's still almost, in fact, it is over 1 million people less than Houston. So the fact that Houston was able to match that is a big deal, and that's a city that is growing. Of course, that's a big deal, right? Them and Arlington, that whole Texas area, is continuing to grow. So if you can get that TV rating even to a 1.0 is a huge deal. It's why their TV ratings for their games were never as bad as the Showboats, because at least you knew in the Houston area itself, you were usually getting 40 to 50K people watching. If that number goes up, it can be a huge deal, and that is something that, let's just say, winning can help out, or can help you out in. Jalen McClellan was a massive upgrade at the quarterback position for the team. Now, will CJ be back? Some people are making it sound like he might be. Some are saying he's definitely not. Hopefully he's not, but the bottom line is this team does have some promise. Again, the attendance was a big deal because it did end up spiking a little bit at the end of the season. As we showed in that first image, the attendance wasn't technically as bad at the end of the season when they jumped back to that near 7K mark after having 4K the literal week prior. So there is still some hope. If this team comes back next season, averages, let's just say, above 6,500 per week, and their TV rating ends up jumping up to even as low as like a 0.7, that's arguably enough to continue justifying them to stick around. Unless these numbers go down again, because if they go down, and I mean like the TV rating hits a 0.5 or lower, and it's the worst TV rating in the league, and the attendance ends up going down even farther, under like 5,500, then yes, I think it might be time to pull the plug. But the fact is, it's too lucrative of a market to just leave this quick. Again, you don't have the issues of the New Jersey, New York, and LA area of just how expensive they are. That's the downgrade for those two massive markets. Is yes, you have that 10 million plus and almost 20K in New York's case, but you lose a lot in regards to how much it costs to play there. Texas isn't as bad, so you're in that area. It's just great for a lot of things. You're close to a lot of other teams. You're not super close to Texas, is a massive state, still hours away from like Arlington and San Antonio, but it's still a much closer area than, let's say this team was in Chicago and they were pulling up these same numbers. It'd be easier to justify moving them to an extent. But again, Chicago's still another massive market the league could go to. The fact is with Houston, you got to give them another year. I hate the change they did with the Gamblers Roughnecks. I said from day one it was going to backfire on them, and I do believe that that is a big reason for it, is that change. But the fact is, it is too big a market, and you're still getting a good enough TV rating number to justify staying there for at least one more year, maybe even two, unless, like I said, if your numbers go down again next year, it's a tough one. Because I know the TV ratings for like almost every market went down to some degree, but as long as you're still rounding out to being the same as like a DC, you can justify keeping them there. Because as long as you continue to be a much bigger, and again, I'm saying much bigger, obviously, because we're talking about over 1 million people, if you're able to continue being a much bigger city in that regard than DC and getting the same TV rating, it means technically you're getting more views for that market than DC is. You know what I mean? So, verdict for the Houston Roughnecks, give them at least one more year. The Showboats. Now, the Showboats, there's a couple stats that aren't here, but I will mention them in a second. Now, Memphis, in terms of the market itself, is one of those markets that is still over 1 million, but obviously is much lower on the totem pole than Houston. They are at basically like 1.34 million people, which is significantly less in regards to the 100,000 place, even a place like Raleigh. Raleigh ends up having over 200K more than them. OKC has almost 200K more than them. Louisville is a bit more, but then not too much. Richmond is a bit more. And of course, big deal is Richmond versus Raleigh. It's like a really close drive. It's like a 2.5-hour drive. Whereas Memphis is really far away from like Knoxville. And yes, it's a couple hours away from Nashville, but even then it's like a bit farther. Hartford, another place that some people will bring up, is 1.17. It's relatively close to Memphis. Birmingham, again, an even smaller market, but again, their TV rating was insane, 2.7. So for Memphis, in terms of market size, not good, especially because you look at the percentage change. You're seeing the Raleigh and OKC areas growing exponentially. You're seeing Richmond growing a ton. Then you see Memphis, the only place in this little grouping that has their percentage of population actually going down. That's a big thing to factor in as well. Now, attendance-wise, this is where I get to the big issue. Yes, it was not, of course, released publicly, but it was estimated that their opening game in the 2023 USFL season had about 15K people. Now, it was really awkward because the Fox broadcast said some insane number, like 30K. I think everybody knows that it was definitely a lot less than that. But 15K would still be a really solid number. But how true is that? It's hard to determine because the Memphis Express and the AAF. The AAF was incredible in attendance in a lot of ways. Again, they only had two markets that averaged under 10K, and even then the Hotshots basically averaged 10K. The Memphis Express were below league average. They were at 12.9. Now, yes, even Birmingham was at that 14K, which, again, the Stallions have not been able to really match, as seen on the right, with the Stallions last year still being 4K shy of that. But Memphis, their ceiling was even less than Birmingham, again, under 13K, just slightly, but still under. Then last year, under 7K attendance. It was the worst in the league, though it was close to Houston. This season, 4K less than. That's bad. That's really bad. I mean, look, that 2K number, I said, there's no excuse for it. People tried to act like the rain was a big deal. Again, DC proved that, yeah, maybe it wasn't as big a deal as people said. That number was inexcusable. The fact is the Showboats were an absolute disaster on the attendance side of things. TV ratings, as mentioned before, because of how the TV ratings is done, they ended up averaging a little under 11K people watching per game, which was significantly worse than pretty much anywhere else. San Antonio was over twice as good as them. You had other places like St. Louis, obviously, was like 7 times better than them. They were terrible. Even Birmingham was like 3 times better than them because, again, you have a market that you had a 2.7 rating in. Now, the other thing that aren't shown here, in terms of the TV viewership, in terms of the games, it's pretty clear that even without that, Memphis is just a team people don't care about. If you go and look on the Wikipedia and you look at every single TV rated game, you will notice that the worst game from every market was Memphis. Every single one was Memphis. I think there may have been like one technicality. Then the 2 worst ESPN games were Memphis. The worst Friday Night Football game was Memphis. And I know the Friday Night Football game has like the draft in it. The bottom line is, basically every network's single worst game was involved with the Memphis Showboats. And most of their second to worst game also involved the Showboats. So not only are you losing that really at least 15 to upwards of 60K viewership compared to the other markets, in terms of the rest of the country, when they see the Showboats on the schedule for that week, they just don't care. And it really sucks to say that because I know we got some really diehard Showboats fans in chat. Of course, G-Man's the classic one. But it's a shame because this team, at the end of the day, it fails on both fronts. You fail in the optics of attendance. You're terrible. You're the worst team by a country mile, even worse than the Roughnecks. Then TV ratings. That's the most important thing for the league. Again, people need to realize that the times have changed. Attendance is not the most important thing when it comes to money, but it is a big deal for optics. And when you suck at that, you better at least have somewhat decent TV ratings. You don't. You're the worst team in your own market, regards to how many people watch. I know TV rating are technically not the worst, but in terms of how many people are watching, you are the worst by a country mile. In terms of nationally, worst by a country mile. At the end of the day, you should move. My verdict is that the Showboats do need to relocate. Now, I made a big deal on Twitter about this to somebody else. They shouldn't have moved last year. That was the correct decision. You have to give a market 3 years unless it is truly revolting numbers. Like your local market is under like 0.5 and your attendance is literally under 3K. Unless it's that, you have to give a market 3 years. The first year, they're a new team. It's a new thing to go see. The second year is kind of like that post-honeymoon phase. Are you still connected? Are you not? And then the third year, okay, what are we really? Every single year, the attendance has been going down and down and down. That's bad. Every single year, the TV ratings just continue to get worse and worse and worse for Memphis. And it's just not good. People blame the team being consistently bad. Again, yes, they've been consistently bad, but not as much people think. It's like people think the USFL version was a terrible team. The USFL version would have made the playoffs if they were in the North Conference. They finished like 5-5 that season. They just missed playoff because of, a couple bad games here or there. Then this team was significantly better than last year. The point differential only tanked so bad because of the final game against the Stallions. Before that, it was not terrible. The fact is, this is a much better team than last year. And again, the San Antonio Brahmas, significantly worse team. We know season ticket renewals are bad for every single team. Yes, the Brahmas probably got a decent amount of new ones, but there's no way those season tickets ended up making that attendance that good, right? The Brahmas having that 8K plus every single game compared to their Showboats team not even having 5K, it's inexcusable. That's not a matter of, the team's just been bad, because the Brahmas were worse than you. So the fact of the matter is, you suck at every single front. TV ratings locally, you're terrible. TV ratings nationally, the worst. Attendance, the worst. Even attendance compared to previous seasons, the worst. It's not like this number was 4K and then it jumped to 6K, where then you can at least say, hey, there's been improvement. You went down. Again, I expected pretty much every market heading into this season, aside from Michigan and Houston, to go down. That's what I said. You can go back to my video. I said those are the 2 markets that will see improvement. Houston, I was wrong about. Michigan, I was right, but not to the extent I thought I was going to be right about. And every other market, I expected to have pretty decent drop-offs, to where overall most markets I actually think did really good this season compared to what I expected. I thought teams like Arlington would do a lot worse. I thought teams like DC would do a lot worse. even St. Louis, I thought would do maybe a bit worse, especially considering what ended up happening. Yet they ended up being really solid. To the point is, the one team that was two teams if you count Houston, the two teams that were massive disappointments were Houston and Memphis. And Memphis was even more so. Because of the fact that their attendance number, I mean, look, I get there was renovations in the stadium, but it's not like you had to go to a significantly worse stadium like the Roughnecks did last year. So it gets to the point where, why should we keep Memphis? Because people said that, I might look desperate to move. No, looking desperate if you move him last year. You move him this year, it's because the market just didn't care about him. And that's the truth. Again, TV ratings, you were terrible. You were the worst overall. Yes, not TV rating in the 0.8, but in terms of actual people, you were the worst in the league. Attendance, the worst in the league. I saw somebody on Twitter try to make the argument, people don't want to go out to a game in Memphis, at this time of the year where they can just sit at home and watch it on TV. So then why weren't they watching it on TV? And again, the Orlando Guardians in the 2023 XFL had significantly better attendance, and they played an even worse venue because they were outside in Florida. Could you imagine if that, I get they played earlier, but even then you still had games being played in April and that early May time slot, and they were still getting people out there. The fact is with Memphis, there's no justification this year to keep them. If the league wants to be smart, they need to move this team. There's a bunch of places. Hell, just on this list alone, OKC, solid. Raleigh, solid. Richmond, solid. Louisville, already rumored. Salt Lake City, I think no. Again, I've talked about Salt Lake City before. I think that when you look at the Salt Lake Stallions, having under 10K a game, and considering that was the AF, big deal. Hartford, I think, would even be a better choice. Fresno, I wouldn't. In California. Grand Rapids, I wouldn't. But aside from those ones, I think that pretty much all those teams above Memphis, plus Hartford, are ones that if there's a place you can play are legitimately solid. Again, Richmond versus Raleigh, you're talking about a 2.5-hour drive. You could get people from that other city to go to them. Again, there's cities that have been growing. OKC, Louisville. In Louisville, initially when the whole 2-team expansion thing was rumored and talked about a few months ago, that was one of the teams that people talked, or one of the cities people talked about. Why would you keep them in Memphis when you already know what you are here? Like, it's one of those things where it's not even this is the floor, because if the floor keeps, it gets to one where you think you've been digging and you hit concrete and you're kind of stuck there with your shovel and you're at the bottom. But then you realize that no, it wasn't really concrete, it was just a bit of hard clay, and you just kept digging more. That's what the Showboats did. We thought they couldn't get worse than last year, and they did. We thought the bare minimum was the Vegas Vipers in 2023. We were wrong. The Showboats, and you know what? Memphis, congrats on being able to somehow get worse than we thought possible. At the end of the day, the league needs to move this team. They do. Now, if they do move them, I still hope the league ends up either, I know that, they're not going to pull a CFL thing and have 9 teams in the league. I think that if they do move them and they're still planning on expansion, they're still going to add 2 more teams. I do think that's still going to be what ends up happening, but the bottom line is Memphis needs to move. Remember, this team was the only market they somewhat tried, and I know the Michigan people that got hired, they actually did their job. But if you remember Memphis, they had this 30 days of Memphis thing. This was the market they did try to improve attendance on the most of any market that wasn't just, internally like Michigan. And so to see the attendance just be this bad, I legitimately don't see an argument to keep them. If you keep them, it makes the league look desperate because it's wow, you really couldn't find anywhere else to put a team. Because again, I know people say Memphis gets burned a lot. This is the whole argument for why it's a 3-year thing. This was the 3rd year. If you're a Memphis fan, you have to be under the impression that, if it's year 3, you got to believe this team's going to be here. And if you don't show up, then they're going to move, and then it's on you. And I think this is let's call it like it is. Memphis leaving pretty much eliminates any idea of Memphis getting any other team in really any other decently sized league again. Because this would be just another failure for the city. And this time it would be on the city. It wouldn't be on the league. And so when it comes down to that, at the end of the day, Memphis needs to move. Houston, give them at least 1 more year. But overall, this has been Zom Fox. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on this. Again, I know Houston is kind of a divisive topic, but I think at the end of the day, when you truly look at the numbers, especially of Houston itself, there's just too much potential to leave this quickly. Memphis, though, it's at such a dire number on both the TV and attendance side that it's almost just malpractice to keep the team in the league. I mean, that attendance overall, 12K this season, got dragged down heavily by just Memphis alone. If you eliminate them, that attendance number jumps up significantly. And I know, of course, St. Louis is the same way the other way, but it's just bad. Again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I don't know when this video is going to be posted. This is going to be recorded probably a decent amount or time before. So maybe some news came out that was after this, which if it did, I'll put a comment down below about it. So be on the lookout for any videos that come out. Will this be posted before or after the Friday Night Football tier list? I don't know. So if it hasn't, then look out for that video. Think about becoming a community member. I'm still planning to do a minimum of 2 uploads every week during the UFL offseason, just like I did last year. And as always, guys, have a great night.